Ma'am, I'm calling security. You're clearly lost. The bailiff's voice echoed through the federal courthouse as 200 suits turned to stare. Dr. Amara Johnson clutched her worn briefcase tighter. Her off-the-rack blazer felt paper-thin under the crystal chandeliers. Whispers rippled through the gallery like wildfire. This is federal court, sweetie. Traffic violations are downstairs, the clerk announced with theatrical volume. Someone laughed, then another. A phone appeared, live-streaming her humiliation. But hidden in her briefcase lay something that would freeze every person in this room. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. DHSURGENT, flashing 47 times. A discreet platinum card peeked from her wallet. These real-life stories reveal America's deepest blind spots. Black stories dismissed before they're heard. Yet touching stories emerge when assumptions shatter against hidden truth. Monday morning. Federal docket. Meridian Airlines versus Department of Transportation. $2.3 billion hanging in the balance. Have you ever been publicly humiliated while secretly holding the power to destroy everyone laughing at you? 9:17 a.m. Federal Courthouse, Washington, D.C. The mahogany-paneled courtroom buzzed with the kind of energy that accompanies high-stakes litigation. Meridian Airlines' legal team occupied the front-row 6 attorneys in bespoke suits, each billing $800 per hour. Their client's proposed merger with European carrier Lufthansa represented the largest aviation deal in decades. Court Clerk Stevens approached Amara with exaggerated concern. "Miss, I really think there's been a misunderstanding. This is United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Are you perhaps looking for, I'm exactly where I need to be?" Amara's voice carried quiet authority that momentarily silenced nearby conversations. Stevens's eyebrows shot up. He'd been humoring what he assumed was a confused public defender's client. Now, something in her tone made him pause. But the assumption train had left the station. "Well then, you'll need proper identification. Bar card, court admission papers." His voice rose deliberately. "We have very strict protocols here." Amara reached into her briefcase, the same briefcase bearing that discreet Executive Travel Program tag. She withdrew her bar card, pristine despite being issued 15 years ago. District of Columbia Bar Association. Amara Johnson, JED, Harvard Law School. Stevens examined it like a suspicious bouncer checking fake ID. "This seems legitimate, but I'll need to verify." He walked to his terminal, typing loudly enough for everyone to hear. The gallery leaned forward, sensing drama. Behind Amara, someone whispered, "Affirmative action, admit." Probably got in on quotas. Her phone buzzed again. The caller ID flashed. Secretary Chen-DOT. She declined the call. 9:22 a.m. Bailiff Martinez returned from his verification mission, face flushed with embarrassment mixed with stubborn authority. He'd called the Bar Association. The card was real. But that only deepened his confusion. "Ma'am, even if you're qualified, this case involves complex transportation regulations, federal aviation law, securities compliance." Each word dripped condescension. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with something more appropriate to your experience level." The gallery erupted in barely suppressed snickers. A Meridian executive nudged his colleague, muttering, "This should be entertaining." But Martinez missed the tell. When Amara's phone screen lit up again, eagle-eyed observers might have noticed the contact list. Names like White House Switchboard and TSA Director Morrison scrolled past before she silenced the device. A young law student in the back row had started live tweeting the discrimination. Her thread was gaining traction. Watching blatant racism in federal court RN. Black female attorney being questioned, humiliated, while white lawyers watch and laugh. This is 2024. Hashtag courtroom bias. Hashtag justice for who? 47 retweets. 128 likes. Growing. 9:26 a.m. The courtroom door opened with authority. Judge Harold Blackwood entered, 20-year veteran of the federal bench, notorious for his no-nonsense approach and short patience for disruptions. Martinez immediately approached the bench for a whispered conference. Amara watched the bailiff's animated gestures, his pointing in her direction, the judge's furrowed brow. Judge Blackwood's gavel echoed once. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a full docket today. Before we proceed with Meridian Airlines versus Department of Transportation, I need to address a preliminary matter. His gaze fixed on Amara. Counselor Johnson, is it? This court handles complex federal transportation law, securities regulations, multi-billion-dollar mergers with international implications. And his tone carried the weight of judicial authority mixed with paternal concern. Are you certain you're prepared for proceedings of this magnitude? The question hung in the air like a sword. Every person in that courtroom understood the subtext. Are you sure you belong here? Meridian's lead counsel, Patricia Vance, daughter of CEO Richard Vance and Harvard Law Review editor, stood gracefully. Your Honor, if opposing counsel requires additional time to prepare or perhaps secure more experienced representation, Meridian would not object to a brief continuance. Her smile was legal, professional, perfect. Her message was crystal clear. This amateur needs help. The gallery murmured approval. Several heads nodded. The live stream viewer count climbed past 500. 9:29 a.m. Amara's phone vibrated with the persistence of a fire alarm. This time she glanced at the screen. Senate Transportation Committee, urgent, flashed alongside DHS Secretary Chen and White House Chief of Staff. She declined them all. But sharp-eyed court reporter Margaret Walsh noticed something else. When Amara had briefly opened her briefcase to silence her phone, a manila folder was visible. Red border. Classified, stamped across the top. And below that, barely legible. Meridian Airlines, security violations. Walsh had been transcribing federal cases for 12 years. She knew classified documents when she saw them. But this couldn't be right. Could it? Judge Blackwood cleared his throat. Ms. Johnson, the court is waiting for your response. Are you prepared to proceed with this matter, or shall we discuss alternative arrangements? The moment stretched like a held breath. 200 people waited for her answer. The livestream audience had grown to over 1,000 viewers, each one watching a black woman being systematically questioned and diminished in America's federal courthouse. Patricia Vance's smirk widened. She'd already won before the case began. But Amara had spent 15 years preparing for moments exactly like this. She'd learned that dignity wasn't about fighting every battle. It was about choosing which battles would change the war. She stood slowly, her worn briefcase in one hand, and spoke with the kind of quiet confidence that commands attention without demanding it. Your Honor, I am precisely where I belong, representing precisely the interests I'm authorized to represent, in precisely the manner I've been empowered to represent them. The courtroom fell silent. Something in her tone had shifted the energy. Now, shall we proceed with the matter at hand? Because I believe Meridian Airlines has some very serious questions to answer. Patricia Vance's smirk faltered. The real case was about to begin. 9:32 Judge Blackwood's eyes narrowed at Amara's response. 20 years on the federal bench had taught him to read between legal lines, and something in her tone suggested depths he hadn't anticipated. "Very well, Counselor Johnson. But I trust you understand the gravity of these proceedings. Meridian Airlines' proposed merger involves international aviation treaties, Federal Aviation Administration oversight, and Department of Transportation regulatory compliance." Patricia Vance rose again, her confidence returning. "Your Honor, perhaps we should establish opposing counsel's specific qualifications for this matter. What aviation law experience does Ms. Johnson possess?" The gallery leaned forward. This was blood sport disguised as legal procedure. Amara remained seated, fingers steepled. "Ms. Vance, my qualifications will become evident as we proceed, unless, of course, Meridian Airlines prefers to resolve this matter through settlement discussions." The suggestion hit like a thunderclap. Settlement? Before the case had even begun? Richard Vance himself sat in the front row, silver-haired CEO, worth $400 million, architect of Meridian's expansion into Europe. His daughter's confident smirk had been his pride. Now confusion flickered across his weathered features. 9:35 a.m. The digital wildfire. The law student's live stream had exploded across social media. Number sign courtroom bias was trending nationally, with video clips spreading like wildfire. Thread, watching systematic racism in federal court. Black attorney being questioned, challenged while white legal team smirks. Judge asking if she's qualified for the case. This is America 2024. 1/12. 2,847 retweets. 8,923 likes. 156 comments. Update. She just suggested settlement. The white lawyers look shook. Something is happening here. Hashed plot twist. 5/12. CNN's legal correspondent had picked up the thread. MSNBC was preparing a segment. The story was growing legs beyond anyone's control. But the most viral clip was a close-up of Amara's face during the questioning calm, almost serene, like someone who knew something everyone else didn't. 9:37 a.m. Security concerns. Bailiff Martinez approached Amara's table with renewed suspicion. "Ma'am, court security requires verification of all materials brought into federal proceedings. I'll need to inspect your briefcase." This was unprecedented. No attorney in living memory had been subjected to mid-hearing briefcase inspection. But Martinez was doubling down, determined to find something, anything, that would justify his initial assessment. "Of course," Amara replied smoothly. "Though I should mention that some materials may require security clearance verification." Security clearance? Martinez hesitated. Federal courthouses handled classified materials regularly, but usually with advance notice and proper protocols. Judge Blackwood intervened. "Ms. Johnson, are you representing that you possess classified materials relevant to this proceeding?" "I'm representing that my authority to be here extends beyond what may be immediately apparent, Your Honor." Patricia Vance exchanged glances with her team. This wasn't standard legal theater. Something was happening that none of them understood. 9:40 a.m. The phone calls intensify. Amara's phone had become a beacon of urgency. Every 30 seconds, another call. DHS Secretary Chen, Senate Majority Leader, Transportation Committee Chair, White House Chief of Staff. She declined them all, but each rejection seemed to amplify the tension in the room. Court reporter Margaret Walsh was taking notice. In 12 years of federal court transcription, she'd never seen this pattern. High-level government officials didn't repeatedly call random attorneys during routine corporate litigation. Walsh started paying closer attention to Amara's briefcase. That classified folder with Meridian Airlines was still partially visible. But now she could see additional markings: TSA investigation and criminal referrals pending. Her fingers paused over the stenotype machine. Whatever was happening here wasn't routine corporate law. 9:43 a.m. Corporate whispers. In the gallery, Meridian's executives were becoming increasingly agitated. CFO Michael Torres leaned toward General Counsel Sarah Kim, whispering urgently, "Who the hell is she?" Legal did full opposition research. No aviation background, no federal practice. Works mostly civil rights cases. Kim's face had gone pale. Unless we missed something. What if she's not here representing a private client? The possibility hung between them like a toxic cloud. If Amara represented federal interests rather than private parties, everything changed. The government possessed enforcement powers that private plaintiffs could only dream of. CEO Richard Vance overheard their exchange. His legendary business instincts, the same instincts that had built Meridian from regional carrier to international powerhouse, were screaming warnings. "Patricia," he whispered to his daughter, "end this. Now, whatever it takes." 9:45 a.m. The pressure campaign. Patricia Vance stood with renewed aggression. "Your Honor, this charade has gone on long enough. Opposing counsel is clearly unprepared for federal transportation litigation. I move for summary judgment based on lack of competent representation." It was a brutal legal maneuver, essentially arguing that Amara was so unqualified that her mere presence constituted inadequate counsel. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Even Judge Blackwood looked surprised by the aggressive tactic. But Amara smiled for the first time that morning, a knowing, almost predatory smile that sent chills through observant spectators. "Ms. Vance, are you certain you want to question my competency to represent federal interests in this matter?" Federal interests. The phrase hung in the air like a revelation. Patricia's confidence wavered. What federal interests? This is a private commercial dispute." "Is it?" Amara's voice carried quiet authority that silenced the room. "Perhaps we should examine Meridian's compliance with federal aviation security regulations before making such sweeping assertions." 8:47 a.m. The moment of truth. Judge Blackwood had heard enough. Something significant was happening in his courtroom, and 20 years of judicial experience told him to proceed with extreme caution. "Ms. Johnson, I'm going to ask you directly. What is the nature of your representation in this matter?" The question everyone had been dancing around for 30 minutes was finally on the table. 200 people held their breath. The live stream audience had grown to over 5,000 viewers, all watching this black woman who had somehow turned the tables on a federal courtroom full of skeptics. Amara reached into her briefcase with deliberate precision. She withdrew a single business card and placed it on the judge's bench. Judge Blackwood picked it up, read it, and his face went completely white. The card was simple, elegant, and devastating. Dr. Amara Johnson, J.D., Ph.D., Deputy Secretary, Transportation Security Administration, Department of Homeland Security. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the sound of breathing. Patricia Vance's mouth fell open. Her father gripped his chair arms until his knuckles went white. Bailiff Martinez took an involuntary step backward. The live stream exploded. "Holy shit! She's Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security!" Never judge a book? Courtroom shock. 15,000 retweets in 60 seconds. But Amara wasn't finished. She reached back into her briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder marked "Classified, Eyes Only" with the Department of Homeland Security seal clearly visible. "Your Honor," she said with quiet authority that now made perfect sense, "I believe it's time we discussed Meridian Airlines' compliance with federal aviation security regulations. All 127 documented violations." Richard Vance felt his $400 million net worth flash before his eyes. The real proceedings were about to begin. 9:48 a.m. The earthquake. The business card lay on Judge Blackwood's bench like a piece of evidence that had just rewritten reality. He read it 3 times, each reading confirming what his mind struggled to accept. Deputy Secretary, Transportation Security Administration, Department of Homeland Security. 20 years of federal judicial experience had taught him to expect the unexpected. But this transcended surprise. This was a seismic shift that retroactively transformed every interaction of the past 30 minutes. Every condescending comment, every questioning of her qualifications, every assumption about her capabilities. All of it now carried a weight that made the air in the courtroom feel heavy with embarrassment and impending consequences. "Bailiff Martinez," Judge Blackwood's voice carried new gravity. "Please approach the bench." Martinez walked forward on unsteady legs, his earlier bravado evaporated into the marble floors. The same man who had questioned her presence suggested she was lost, called for security verification, now faced the reality that he had been interrogating a senior federal official. "Your Honor," Martinez's voice cracked slightly. We had no indication. She never identified herself as, "That will be all, bailiff." Judge Blackwood's tone carried the weight of judicial authority mixed with barely contained mortification. In 33 years of courthouse service, Martinez had never seen a judge's demeanor shift so dramatically. 9:50 a.m. The galleries collapse. The transformation rippled through the courtroom like a slow-motion explosion. Patricia Vance remained frozen at counsel table, her Harvard Law Review confidence shattered against the rocks of miscalculation. The woman she had dismissed as unqualified controlled the very federal agency that regulated her client's industry. Richard Vance's legendary business instincts were screaming full-scale retreat. As CEO, he had spent decades navigating regulatory relationships, and he understood power structures better than most. The Deputy Secretary of Transportation Security Administration didn't appear in routine commercial litigation. Her presence meant something had gone terribly wrong. Behind him, Meridian's executive team whispered in panic. "How the fuck did we miss this?" Legal said she was a civil rights attorney, small practice, no aviation background. She is the aviation background. She is the federal government. CFO Michael Torres was already calculating. The proposed merger with Lufthansa was worth $2.3 billion, but TSA authority included grounding authority, aircraft certification, security compliance. If they had violated federal aviation security regulations, General Counsel Sarah Kim was frantically scrolling through her phone, searching for any intelligence about why the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security would personally appear in their litigation. What she found made her blood freeze. Breaking news alerts were flooding her screen. Developing federal investigation into major airline security violations. Exclusive TSA probe of international carrier safety protocols. Breaking criminal referrals expected in aviation security case. 9:52 a.m. Digital wildfire. The live stream had become a phenomenon. The law students' thread was being retweeted by celebrities, politicians, and verified accounts across the political spectrum. Update: she's the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Every person who questioned her qualifications Just question the #2 official at TSA, the woman who literally runs aviation security in America. I am deceased. #courtroom karma. 8 of 15, 47,000 retweets, 156,000 likes. Trending #1 nationally. CNN had dispatched a crew. MSNBC was going live. Fox News was preparing segments. The story had transcended local courthouse drama and become a national conversation about assumptions, bias, and the dangerous cost of prejudgment. But for the people in that courtroom, social media metrics were irrelevant. They were living through a real-time disaster of their own making. 9:53 a.m. The classified materials. Amara opened the manila folder with deliberate precision, revealing documents that made General Counsel Sarah Kim's worst fears seem optimistic. The papers bore official seals, classification markings, and headers that spelled out Meridian's corporate nightmare. Transportation Security Administration Classified Investigation Report. Meridian Airlines Security Violations. Criminal Referrals Pending Enforcement Action Authorized. Judge Blackwood recognized the formatting. Federal Investigation Reports. The kind of documents that preceded congressional hearings, criminal prosecutions, and regulatory actions that could destroy companies. Dr. Johnson, his voice now carried the respect her position demanded. Are these materials properly before this court? Your Honor, Meridian Airlines initiated this litigation challenging Department of Transportation regulatory authority. They have therefore opened the door to examination of their compliance with federal transportation security regulations. The legal logic was elegant and devastating. Meridian had sued the government, claiming regulatory overreach. In doing so, they had invited scrutiny of their regulatory compliance. It was a textbook example of careful planning, or perhaps careful orchestration. Patricia Vance found her voice, though it cracked with stress. Your Honor, this appears to be prosecutorial misconduct, using civil litigation to advance criminal investigation. Ms. Vance, Amara's response carried the authority of someone who had spent years navigating the intersection of law and national security. Meridian Airlines filed this lawsuit 3 months ago. Our investigation began 18 months ago. Your client chose to litigate against the very agency investigating their security violations. The timeline made Patricia's objection collapse. Meridian had sued the government while under federal investigation. Whether through ignorance or arrogance, they had walked into a courtroom controlled by their investigators. 9:55 a.m. The evidence emerges. Amara began laying out documents with the precision of a prosecutor presenting a capital case. Each page represented months of federal investigation, thousands of man-hours, and the kind of detailed regulatory analysis that could destroy corporate entities. 127 documented violations of Code of Federal Regulations Title 49, Section 1544.103. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone presenting facts rather than arguments. Security screening failures at Denver International, Reagan National, and Los Angeles International airports. Richard Vance watched his daughter's face drain of color as the reality settled in. This wasn't litigation anymore. This was a federal enforcement action disguised as civil proceedings. Unauthorized personnel access to secured areas, 47 documented incidents across 8 major hubs. Amara continued laying out documents. Failure to implement required background check protocols for maintenance staff. 23 separate violations at international terminals. Each violation carried potential fines. But collectively, they represented something far more dangerous. A pattern of security negligence that could trigger criminal liability for corporate officers. 9:57 a.m. The criminal dimension. The classified folder contained one more document that transformed the proceeding from regulatory dispute to potential criminal case. Amara withdrew a single page with red border markings that made Judge Blackwood involuntarily lean back. Department of Justice, Criminal Referral Authorization, Meridian Airlines Executive Leadership, willful violation of federal aviation security statutes. Recommended charges: 18 U.S.C. Section 371, conspiracy; 49 U.S.C. Section 46,312, security violations. The document contained names: Richard Vance, CEO; Patricia Vance, General Counsel; Michael Torres, CFO; Sarah Kim, Corporate Counsel. Specific individuals with specific criminal exposure. Patricia Vance was no longer looking at regulatory fines or civil penalties. She was looking at potential federal criminal charges that could result in prison sentences. Your Honor, her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. I request an immediate recess to consult with my client. 9:58 a.m., the hidden leverage. But Amara wasn't finished. She reached into her briefcase one final time and withdrew a document that completed the picture. A single page that explained why she had appeared personally in what should have been routine corporate litigation. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation Oversight hearing scheduled today, 11 a.m. Witness, Dr. Amara Johnson, Deputy Secretary, TS. A subject, Meridian Airlines security violations and merger implications. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Amara had congressional testimony scheduled in 90 minutes. This courtroom proceeding wasn't separate from federal oversight. It was part of it. Ms. Vance, Amara's voice carried the finality of checkmate. Your client filed this lawsuit claiming that Department of Transportation merger review exceeded regulatory authority. In 90 minutes, I will be testifying before Congress about your client's security violations and why their proposed merger poses national security risks. The live stream audience watched Patricia Vance's face cycle through disbelief, recognition, and terror in real time. But I'm prepared to discuss alternative resolutions, Amara continued with quiet authority. If Meridian Airlines is interested in comprehensive compliance discussions rather than extended litigation. Judge Blackwood understood the subtext. Amara was offering them a way out cooperation instead of prosecution, settlement instead of congressional humiliation, regulatory supervision instead of criminal charges. But the offer came with an expiration date measured in minutes, not days. Richard Vance stood slowly, his $400 million fortune and corporate legacy balanced on the edge of a knife. The woman they had dismissed and humiliated held the power to destroy everything he had built. 10 a.m., the moment of truth. Dr. Johnson! Richard Vance's voice carried the weight of a man who had just realized he was playing chess against a grandmaster while thinking it was checkers. Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately. Amara smiled the same knowing smile that had unsettled observers minutes earlier, now fully explained by the devastating power she wielded. Mr. Vance, I have congressional testimony in 60 minutes, but I believe we can reach an understanding that serves everyone's interests. The courtroom remained silent as 200 people witnessed the complete reversal of power dynamics. The woman who had been questioned, challenged, and humiliated now held the cards that would determine Meridian Airlines' future. The real negotiation was about to begin. 10:05 a.m. Emergency relocation. Judge Blackwood's chambers had been hastily cleared for what had transformed from routine litigation into high-stakes federal negotiations. The mahogany-paneled room, typically reserved for judicial conferences, Amia hosted a meeting that would determine the fate of a $2.3 billion corporate merger. Present, Dr. Amara Johnson, representing the full authority of the Department of Homeland Security. Richard Vance, CEO, whose net worth hung in the balance. Patricia Vance, General Counsel, whose legal career faced potential criminal jeopardy. Secretary Chen appeared via secure video link from DOT headquarters, his presence underscoring the federal government's commitment to this matter. The power dynamics had completely inverted. 30 minutes earlier, these same people had questioned Amara's qualifications to practice law. Now they sat across from the second highest official in transportation security, watching her lay out documents that could destroy their company. 10:07 a.m., the numbers game. Amara opened a laptop displaying spreadsheets that represented 18 months of federal investigation. Each line item carried financial implications that made Richard Vance's legendary business instincts scream warnings. 127 documented violations of CFR Title 49, Section 1544.103. Her voice carried the calm precision of someone who had spent years translating complex regulations into corporate consequences. Potential fines under 49 U.S.C. Section 46,301, $25,000 per violation for individuals, $25,000 per violation for small entities, unlimited for large entities like Meridian. Patricia Vance was calculating frantically. 127 violations. Unlimited fines for large corporations. Conservative estimates put their exposure at $50 million minimum. But federal agencies had discretion to impose penalties far exceeding minimum thresholds. However, Amara continued, security violations also trigger enhanced scrutiny under the Federal Aviation Act, specifically authority to ground aircraft pending compliance verification. The words hit Richard Vance like physical blows. Grounding authority meant operational shutdown. Meridian operated 847 daily flights across 23 international destinations. A grounding order would cost $12 million per day in lost revenue, plus immeasurable damage to customer confidence and corporate reputation. 10:10 a.m., the merger implications. Secretary Chen's voice crackled through the secure video link, adding federal weight to the proceedings. The proposed merger with Lufthansa requires DOT certification of security compliance. Current violations preclude such certification. The $2.3 billion deal had been Richard Vance's legacy project, the capstone achievement that would transform Meridian from regional carrier to global aviation powerhouse. European markets, expanded route networks, economies of scale that would position them among the world's top 5 airlines. All of it now hung on the decisions made in this room over the next 30 minutes. "Sir," Patricia addressed her father with barely controlled panic, "the merger agreement contains material adverse change clauses. If we lose DOT certification, Lufthansa can withdraw without penalty." Richard Vance understood corporate law better than most CEOs. Material adverse change provisions were escape hatches that allowed deals to collapse when circumstances fundamentally altered a company's value or prospects. Federal security violations constituted exactly such circumstances. 10:12 a.m. Criminal exposure. Amara withdrew the DOJ criminal referral document, placing it squarely in the center of the conference table where everyone could see the names listed under recommended charges. 18 U.S.C. Section 371 covers conspiracy to violate federal aviation security statutes, she explained with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had briefed similar cases to congressional committees. Maximum penalty: 5 years federal prison per count. 49 U.S.C. Section 46, 1312 addresses willful violations of aviation security regulations. Maximum penalty, 10 years federal prison. Patricia Vance stared at her own name on the criminal referral. Harvard Law Review editor, Federal Circuit Court clerkship, partner track at one of D.C.'s most prestigious firms. All of it potentially destroyed by decisions made in corporate boardrooms, where security compliance had been treated as regulatory paperwork rather than federal law. The Justice Department's corporate compliance guidelines consider cooperation, remediation, and voluntary disclosure as mitigating factors, Amara continued. Companies that demonstrate genuine commitment to compliance reform receive significantly more favorable treatment. The carrot and stick were clearly defined. Cooperation meant regulatory supervision and financial penalties. Resistance meant criminal prosecution and corporate destruction. 10:15 a.m. The ultimatum. Richard Vance had built Meridian Airlines through decades of calculated risk-taking and strategic decision-making, but he had never faced stakes this high with so little room for maneuvering. "Dr. Johnson," his voice carried the weight of a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms, now forced to negotiate from weakness, "what exactly are you proposing?" Amara opened a second folder containing what appeared to be a pre-drafted agreement. The federal government hadn't just investigated Meridian's violations, they had prepared a comprehensive resolution framework. Voluntary compliance agreement with the Transportation Security Administration, she read from the document. Immediate implementation of enhanced security protocols across all Meridian facilities. $50 million investment in upgraded screening technology and personnel training over 18 months. The financial commitment was substantial but manageable. Meridian's annual revenue exceeded $8 billion. $50 million represented significant expense, but not existential threat. Federal Oversight Monitor embedded in Meridian's security operations. Quarterly compliance audits by independent third-party contractors. Monthly reporting to TSA headquarters. This was more problematic. Federal oversight meant loss of operational autonomy. Every security decision would be subject to government scrutiny. Every policy change would require federal approval. Executive accountability provisions, Amara continued. Personal liability for corporate officers in case of future violations. Zero tolerance for non-compliance. Patricia Vance's legal training told her this was the most dangerous provision. Personal liability meant individual criminal exposure for corporate decisions. It transformed security compliance from corporate priority to personal survival imperative. 10:18 a.m., the Congressional Clock Secretary. Chen's voice interrupted the tension. "Dr. Johnson, you have 42 minutes until Senate testimony. We need resolution or escalation decision." The timeline pressure was intentional. Congressional hearings carried public consequences that private negotiations could avoid. Once Amara testified before the Senate Commerce Committee, Meridian's security violations would become public record. Media attention. Shareholder lawsuits. Customer confidence collapse. "Mr. Vance," Amara's voice carried finality, "you have 3 options. First, accept voluntary compliance agreement. Maintain operational control. Preserve merger opportunity. Second, contest violations through administrative hearing process. Face public scrutiny. Risk criminal prosecution. Third, force congressional testimony. Ensure maximum public exposure. Guarantee merger collapse." The choice architecture was elegant in its simplicity. Cooperation offered survival with supervision. Resistance guaranteed destruction with publicity. 10:20 a.m. The business calculation. Richard Vance's legendary deal-making instincts were screaming conflicting signals. Accept federal oversight. Lose operational independence, but preserve the company. Fight the allegations. Maintain autonomy, but risk criminal prosecution and corporate destruction. The merger, he asked quietly. If we accept your terms, Lufthansa will proceed. DOT certification becomes possible upon demonstrated compliance, Secretary Chen responded. Lufthansa has indicated willingness to proceed subject to resolution of regulatory concerns. Translation: cooperation kept the $2.3 billion deal alive. Resistance killed it permanently. Patricia calculated rapidly. Personal criminal liability versus professional survival. Federal oversight versus federal prosecution. Corporate accountability versus individual incarceration. Dr. Johnson, she asked, with the precision of someone whose freedom hung in the balance, what guarantees do we have regarding the criminal referrals? Voluntary compliance demonstrates good faith effort to remediate violations, Amara replied carefully. Justice Department considers such efforts favorably in prosecution decisions. No guarantees, but significant mitigation. 3:22 a.m. The decision point. The room fell silent except for the video link's electronic hum. Outside, 200 people remained in the federal courtroom, watching social media feeds that had transformed this story into national conversation about bias, assumptions, and the dangerous cost of underestimating quiet competence. Richard Vance looked at his daughter, the Harvard Law graduate whose career hung in the balance, at the merger documents that represented his legacy, at the compliance agreement that would save everything while transforming everything. 38 minutes until congressional testimony. 18 months of federal investigation. $2.3 billion in merger value. Criminal prosecution potential for his family and executives. The mathematics of power had shifted completely. The woman they had dismissed now held every card that mattered. Dr. Johnson, Richard Vance's voice carried the weight of capitulation disguised as cooperation. Let's discuss the specific terms of your compliance framework. Amara smiled the same knowing smile that had unsettled observers 90 minutes earlier. But now everyone understood exactly why she had been confident. The negotiation details were about to begin, and the federal government held all the leverage that mattered. 8:45 a.m. The agreement. The Voluntary Compliance Agreement bore signatures that transformed corporate catastrophe into regulatory supervision. Richard Vance's hand trembled slightly as he signed documents that preserved his company while fundamentally altering its operations. Meridian Airlines Voluntary Compliance Framework. Transportation Security Administration Oversight Program. The terms were comprehensive: $50 million investment in security infrastructure over 18 months. Federal Oversight Monitor with embedded authority. Quarterly compliance audits by independent contractors. Monthly reporting to TSA headquarters. Executive accountability provisions carrying personal liability for future violations. But most importantly, preservation of DOT merger certification eligibility. The $2.3 billion Lufthansa deal could proceed, subject to demonstrated compliance with enhanced security protocols. Dr. Amara Johnson had achieved the rarest of federal enforcement outcomes: complete corporate capitulation without requiring criminal prosecution or public congressional humiliation. 10:47 a.m. Immediate consequences. The courthouse fallout began immediately. Bailiff Martinez found himself summoned to administrative offices for disciplinary review. 23 years of federal service now overshadowed by 30 minutes of documented bias against a senior government official. The administrative review would be swift and decisive. Suspension pending mandatory bias training. Formal reprimand entered into permanent personnel file. 6 months of supervised probation with quarterly performance evaluations. Court Clerk Stevens faced similar consequences. His theatrical questioning of Dr. Johnson's credentials, captured on live stream and witnessed by hundreds, constituted unprofessional conduct that violated federal courthouse protocols. Administrative suspension, mandatory diversity and inclusion training, written apology to be filed in court records. Reassignment to non-public facing duties pending completion of remedial education. 10:50 a.m. Systemic changes announced. Judge Blackwood's chambers became the epicenter of immediate institutional reform. The federal courthouse system couldn't ignore what had transpired, bias so blatant it had been live-streamed to national audiences. Chief Judge Morrison, contacted via emergency conference call, authorized immediate implementation of new protocols. Professional courtesy standard for federal courthouses. All legal professionals to be treated with uniform dignity regardless of appearance, attire, or assumed background. Security screening and credential verification to follow standardized procedures without discriminatory application. Bias reporting application. Anonymous digital platform allowing real-time documentation of discriminatory treatment within federal facilities. Reports would trigger immediate investigation and corrective action. Mandatory training initiative. Quarterly education programs addressing unconscious bias, cultural competency, and professional interaction standards. 16 hours annually for all courthouse personnel. Oversight Committee establishment. Diverse panel, including federal judges, attorneys from varied backgrounds, and community representatives to review discrimination complaints and recommend policy changes. 11 a.m. Congressional testimony. Dr. Johnson's Senate testimony proceeded via secure video link from the federal courthouse, adding dramatic weight to her prepared remarks. The backdrop of marble columns and judicial authority emphasized the gravity of aviation security violations. Senator Williams, Meridian Airlines' security compliance failures represent systemic negligence that threatened passenger safety across multiple airport facilities. Her testimony carried the calm authority that had devastated corporate confidence 2 hours earlier. The Senate Commerce Committee listened to details of 127 documented violations, criminal referral recommendations, and the voluntary compliance framework that had resolved immediate enforcement concerns. The Transportation Security Administration will continue monitoring Meridian's compliance through embedded federal oversight. This case demonstrates that aviation security requires constant vigilance and immediate accountability. 11:15 a.m. Corporate implementation. Meridian Airlines Emergency Board meeting convened virtually, with directors scattered across multiple time zones but unified in their shock at morning developments. CEO Richard Vance briefed them on regulatory reality that had transformed overnight. Immediate leadership changes. Chief Security Officer terminated for compliance failures. New position created. Vice President of Regulatory Affairs reporting directly to the CEO. Federal Oversight Monitor to be embedded within security operations beginning Monday. $50 million compliance investment approved unanimously. Board members understood that resistance meant corporate destruction, while cooperation preserved the Lufthansa merger and long-term viability. Patricia Vance retained her general counsel position, but with fundamentally altered responsibilities. Her legal acumen, tested under federal pressure, had helped navigate corporate survival. Personal criminal liability remained possible, but significantly reduced through cooperation. 11:30 a.m. Public response. The live stream had transformed into cultural phenomenon. Number sign, never judge. Book trending globally with 2.3 million mentions. Video clips of the courthouse bias followed by dramatic reveal had been viewed 15 million times across platforms. Commentary ranged from celebration of quiet dignity, overcoming loud prejudice, to analysis of systemic bias within legal institutions. Law schools scheduled special seminars examining unconscious bias in professional settings. The American Bar Association announced formation of a special committee on courthouse bias, tasked with developing national standards for professional courtesy and discrimination prevention. Harvard Law School invited Dr. Johnson for a special lecture series, Power, Prejudice, and Professional Excellence. 12 other law schools followed with similar invitations. 12 p.m. Legacy established. 6 months later, federal courthouse bias incidents had decreased 73% across all districts implementing the professional courtesy standard. Meridian Airlines achieved exemplary security compliance ratings. 3 additional airlines voluntarily adopted similar federal oversight programs. The case study became required reading in federal judicial training programs and law school curricula focusing on bias awareness and institutional reform. Dr. Amara Johnson's approach document, Prepare, Execute with Precision, never descend to their level, but rise above and change the system itself, became a template for transforming individual confrontations into systemic solutions. Quiet dignity had defeated loud prejudice through preparation, competence, and strategic patience. 6 months later, the transformation. The marble corridors of federal courthouses across America carried new energy. Professional interactions that once defaulted to assumptions now followed standardized protocols of dignity and respect. The professional courtesy standard had spread from Washington, D.C. to 47 district courts nationwide. Dr. Amara Johnson's methodology had become institutional doctrine. Document thoroughly, prepare strategically, execute with precision. Never lower yourself to their level, rise above, and change the system itself. The numbers told the story of systemic transformation. Federal courthouse bias incidents down 73%. Anonymous reporting through the Bias Detection app had identified and corrected discriminatory patterns before they escalated into public confrontations. Quarterly training sessions had educated over 8,000 federal courthouse personnel on unconscious bias recognition and professional interaction standards. Meridian Airlines had achieved something unprecedented in aviation industry history. Exemplary security compliance ratings following federal enforcement action. CEO. Richard Vance's $50 million investment in security infrastructure had not only satisfied TSA requirements, but positioned Meridian as an industry leader in passenger safety protocols. The Lufthansa merger had proceeded successfully, creating a $2.3 billion aviation partnership that now served as a model for international regulatory cooperation. Patricia Vance's legal career had survived and flourished, her experience navigating federal enforcement action making her one of the most sought-after aviation attorneys in Washington. The ripple effect law schools across the country had integrated Dr. Johnson's case study into mandatory curricula. Harvard Law School's special lecture series, Power, Prejudice, and Professional Excellence, had been attended by over 2,000 students and practicing attorneys. The recordings had been viewed 500,000 times online. The American Bar Association's Special Committee on Courthouse Bias, had published national guidelines now adopted by federal and state court systems. Real-life stories like Dr. Johnson's had sparked comprehensive examination of how assumptions and prejudice operated within legal institutions. These touching stories of individual courage confronting systemic bias had inspired legislative action. The Transportation Equity Act, passed with bipartisan support, tied federal funding to bias training requirements and established the Office of Civil Rights Enforcement within the Department of Transportation. Black stories that had historically been silenced or dismissed now found platforms for institutional change. Dr. Johnson's mentorship program had supported 200 young attorneys of color, providing both professional guidance and strategic wisdom for navigating bias while advancing justice. The personal legacy. But perhaps the most significant transformation had been cultural. The viral live stream watched by 15 million people across social media platforms had crystallized a fundamental truth. Competence speaks louder than assumptions. Preparation defeats prejudice. And quiet dignity possesses power that loud confrontation cannot match. Dr. Johnson's approach had demonstrated that the most effective response to being underestimated isn't anger. It's excellence, so undeniable that systems must evolve to accommodate truth. Your turn. Have you witnessed bias in professional settings? In courtrooms, corporate offices, academic institutions? Share your story in the comments below. What systemic changes would you implement to address discrimination before it escalates? Hit subscribe for more real-life stories of quiet courage, transforming institutional culture. Share this video with someone who needs to see that dignity and preparation can defeat prejudice every time. Remember, when faced with assumptions about your capabilities, don't argue with ignorance. Demonstrate competence so comprehensive that silence becomes impossible. What bias have you overcome through excellence? What institutional change have you inspired through strategic patience rather than reactive anger? Tell us your touching stories of transformation. The comment section is yours. Let's build a community committed to changing systems rather than just winning arguments. Subscribe now for more stories of individuals who faced down institutional bias and emerged victorious through preparation, professionalism, and the quiet power of undeniable competence. Your story of overcoming assumptions could be the next one we feature.